Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hey,
Hi,
Tracy.
Tracy.
Hello.
Well,
Hi, Tom.
Well, I guess this is it for us, right?
Yes, Christina will be joining us a little later, but since we don't know exactly when, we shouldn't wait for her to get started.
Okay, well, let's call the meeting to order. And Michelle, did you want to take attendance?
Yes, I will record who's in attendance. I have the participant list and I will record the attendance.
Okay, great. For the review and approval of the minutes, I believe I don't have the May minutes. I could not find them. The July was connected to the email about the meeting, but I did not see the May, and I think the reason it was put off was because I wasn't able to download it last time. So if everyone is in agreement, I think we need to wait on that one set of minutes, but if I'm ready for July myself to approve on that. So
Me too.
if anyone
I second
wanted
that.
to. Okay. So Chris motioned and Michelle second.
Mhm.
All in favor?
I,
Aye.
Anybody else? Tom?
hi. Sorry, couldn't find that unmute button.
Okay, great. And now, then we will welcome Steve to the meeting. Thank you for joining us, Steve. And you have a presentation to give us, and we're looking forward to that. And then we're going to go over some timelines. So, and I think there's going to be also some time for questions. So, take it away, Steve.
All right.
You're on.
Well, in the interest of time, I actually fortunately took a bunch of notes that I'm going to try to stick to as well as I can to keep us on time. Obviously, the main focus is going to be on the draft transition plan that has been sent out in pieces and parts, and then finally the whole thing pieced together once the whole document was done. Hopefully those of you who reviewed the entire document have a greater appreciation for why I thought we just needed to deliver chapters as I got them, because it's quite a big technical document and it's like an elephant that you have to eat one bite at a time. So it did come together quite well as I was able to dedicate good chunks of time to it. I was pretty happy with how it was, but as with anything, there were still some things in there that fortunately many of you caught, and I appreciate all those of you who took the time to review either a chapter here, chapter there, or the whole thing and send me email comments or send them to Michelle, who forwarded all those on to me. I did review all of your comments. Many of the comments regarding suggestions or typos or things that were errors on my part from trying to hurry through and get it delivered have been made. Changes have been made and the document itself has been updated. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over every comment, every whatever that everyone gave me. The changes that have been made in track changes in Microsoft Word. So once we get through tonight and any subsequent things that might trickle in, which I don't know that there are any, I'm going to be giving Michelle an updated version of the document with track changes on it. So those of you who did provide comments, questions, found suggestions or anything like that, please ensure that I adequately addressed your comments. As I said, many very good comments were provided, and I will certainly use those not only for your document, but subsequent documents for other clients in the future. I will go over a couple of things a little more general because several of you had similar questions about, what's the process for timelines and prioritization and all those other kind of things, as well as discuss some specific topics that are addressed in the document. And hopefully once I get through those explanations, it will clarify some of the questions that you had. And again, many of you did have those. So again, my goal here is to get through tonight with all of the comments, especially the questions that people had and threw out there. And at the end of the process here, I'll be sending in a revised document that has all the changes highlighted in track changes, so you can see what the public review version of the document will be. And just a reminder, the public review version of the document will still have some holes in it because we would still be waiting for public comments that we may need to address, and a number of other things, but and get final dates on when the document will go to city council for approval and all that kind of stuff. But once we get through this next version and I get the thumbs up from everyone on the task force and Michelle and others at the city, the public review version will be prepared and delivered and published out for public review and comment in the manner that I think we talked about last time, Michelle, regarding where it's going to be placed and what the start and end time of the public review period is and all those kind of things. And then we'll resend letters to advocacy groups. And I know there's other locations that the city is interested in soliciting comments from the public at. So with that, again, not going to go over every single comment, but more focused on some of the questions and inquiries that several of you had, and there were a lot of them. So hopefully we can get through all those. And then at the end of that process, if anyone has a specific question that they want to know how it was addressed, you just can't wait for the document. If we have time, I would be more than happy to do that. So there was a comment and question about what is going to be the process for developing the timeline of the alterations. As you have probably seen, if you go through the document, between your buildings and parks and parking lots and on-street parking and sidewalks and curb ramps, I mean, you have a very large program that has a very large dollar amount to it. That's probably even low. Only because it doesn't include any design or survey or other investigations that may be needed. The process for developing and prioritizing improvements really falls to the maybe this task force or task force made up of department heads from facilities and parks and planning and engineering, public works, whatever. To try to prioritize. Many of the right-of-way improvements I know are already underway. There are a number of sidewalk projects. There are a number of curb ramp projects that are going on. And actually, I know DLZ is actually doing some curb ramp replacements for the city because I keep getting emails from our guys asking what can they do to make it right. So, because there's a lot of very difficult, tight situations. That you have is I know I'm telling nobody a top secret thing here that you've got some pretty tight areas with curb ramps, particularly where you have the commercial buildings up close to the street on Detroit and Madison. But the process for developing that, what projects come first and when do we do them, really is, if we're looking at a 30-year process, is going to be something that between your capital improvement program, other projects that you're doing, whether it's a building renovation or a park, whether it's a street alteration that you have to do, curb ramps, you need to decide how you're going to fund some of these things, I'm sure. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a second, regarding especially the sidewalk maintenance responsibility that was brought up. Funding allocations annually by the city council, I would imagine, will be based on what other projects you're doing. Obviously, if you're going to, and the city's been, you guys have probably been the biggest moving target I've ever had, because when I started the project, you didn't have the community center open at all. Cove was not open, and you had programs in other buildings. And then as we got into it, those other buildings went away, and Michelle said, well, let's do Cove instead. And we don't have any programs here anymore. All your senior and children's programs got moved. So, we've had a little bit of a moving target on that. But that, I think, only goes to show the effort that this task force, which has been tasked to do that and guide the compliance efforts of the city, as well as the various department heads that I know I have interacted with, all of whom understand the need to provide greater accessibility to city programs and facilities. So many of the things in the transition plan are slightly outdated, but I can't keep going back and doing them. But I've talked to Michelle about keeping records as ADA coordinator of all the ADA improvement projects you make, whether it's ADA specific or as part of the Cove improvements, you're doing them as part of the building code and the requirements for accessibility in the building code. So the prioritization and timeline for future alternatives or alterations is really going to have to be a collaboration. We have given you some guidance based on what we think. When we do the prioritization, just as a reminder, the priority of an improvement or a space is really dependent on two things. One is how much does each one of the amenities that deviates from the standard, how much does it deviate? For example, a door that is required to be 32 inches wide, that is 31 3/4 of an inch wide, is probably not a very high priority. The impact that that has on accessibility for most mobility device users is fairly minor. However, once you start getting into 30 or 29 or 28-inch doors, especially for some of the larger wheelchairs, manual wheelchairs, you start to get into more difficulty, and that's where the priority goes up. And that's regardless of whether it's a door into the building, whether it's a door into the restroom, whether it's a door into a department. The amount of deviation sets one of the goals that we have for setting a priority. The other factor that goes into play is not only the deviation and how much, but then we do look at where is that deviation. So in the example I just gave with the door, having a corrective actions at the building entry doors is certainly more important than making all the departments' entry doors accessible. Because if you can't get into the building, anything you do into the building is kind of irrelevant or much less of an issue. So we try to combine those two things to develop what we have for the low, medium, and high priorities. And if you look through all the parks and all the different facilities that you have, you can see that there's a scattering of high, medium, low all over the place. And I think someone mentioned something about they were surprised that restrooms were only a medium priority. And again, restrooms in and of themselves, especially if you have to go to the bathroom, are a high priority. But other factors come into play from a contextual standpoint of, are there other restrooms in that facility that are accessible? Are there other restrooms on that floor that are accessible? How much is the deviation from the standard? So individual components of a restroom may be low or high or medium. But again, it kind of comes into play with the whole process, because it's very unlikely, unless you can do some of the improvements internally, which you can, to save a lot of time and money. Your sign shop can fabricate signs. Your building maintenance staff can can change out doors or change out doorknobs for lever hardware. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do internally to save money and expedite the compliance process. But some of the more what I probably would say are some of the higher priority things to get people into a restroom, like the concession building at Lakewood Park, or some of the other restrooms that have accessibility issues that you don't have a wheelchair accessible stall. Some of those are going to have to probably be put off a little bit longer, only because you need to go in and figure out what other codes come into play if you need to enlarge a toilet compartment to make it wheelchair accessible. Can you do it by taking out an adjacent toilet without affecting your fixture count or the plumbing code? Or do you need to go into an adjacent closet or into an adjacent space to enlarge the entire single user restroom or family restroom? So there's a lot of things that come into play in setting the prioritization and actually what improvements are you going to do in 2024? What are you going to do in 2025? And you know, as a planning document, the transition plan gives you the best information that we can based on what we know when we know it. Where you go from there in the implementation phase is where Michelle and all of the other staff members that are on this call and involved in making decisions for their departments, and many of the people that are not on this call that and not on this task force that have a very important role in accessibility in the city, especially your parks and your right of way. So making those decisions is going to be very, very difficult. And I'm sure that some of the facility staff and others have a pretty good idea about what they would like to see. But as many of you know, through the political process and budgeting and finding money, because the money tree hasn't grown in Michigan in many, many years, and I'm pretty sure it hasn't in Ohio either. Money doesn't grow on trees, so you need to find ways to make your dollars work for you, stretch them out as far as you can by doing things in-house and maybe moving programs or changing locations. You've already done a great job of doing that with Cove. Cove fixed probably 3 or 4 different buildings that you now don't have to do anything for because those programs have been moved to Cove for your children and adults and seniors. So that's an unusual situation that you're able to economize and make a big bang for your dollar. But that was also a very big dollar project. You know, you spent a lot of money purchasing that property and designing it and going in and tearing stuff out and rebuilding it. And it's a great and beautiful facility. So, you know, Town Hall has a number of challenges. One of the things that I started doing with my transition plans about 4 years ago to help clients even further was to try to get them to focus not on every individual little thing all over, but look at your highest use public facilities and then look at what are your highest priority access needs at those highest use public facilities. So your court, your city hall, your community center, your Lakewood Park, and some of your other very high use parks, highest use parks. You know, those really need to be your priorities, and then you can nibble away at other things as you go. And unfortunately, although there may not really even be a huge need, but by the letter of the AD statute, you know, all your fire stations have to be accessible and police stations have to be accessible and all that other stuff, but they're going to be fairly low on the process just because firefighters generally, you know, they have to be physically fit, but ADA doesn't exempt those buildings or spaces from being accessible. So, and I have had that discussion in ad infinitum with all of my architects, including just last week, where a client told them that they didn't want to make their new fire station showers accessible. And they come to me again and ask me the question, does it have to be? And I respond back again, yes, every 3 months, somebody asks me, does it have to be? And it does. The answer is yes. And I have all kinds of letters from the Department of Justice and from the Access Board, and letters that U.S. attorneys have written to communities that tell them, yes, they do. So there's not too much doubt about that. But from a priority standpoint, is the likelihood of the city of Lakewood going in and saying, hey, we need to do a major ADA project in fire station, whatever, it's not going to happen. You have far too many other needs that will grant much better access to the public and maybe even some of your employees at the same time to be able to do it. So I think the city's next major role, now that you're going to be through the ADA transition plan process, going into implementation, is putting everything on the wall and trying to, it's like trying to do a renovation of your house. You just can't go in and do everything in 1 year because you don't have the money to do that either. You need a roof, you need a new furnace, you need insulation, you need to paint, you need to replace your beds and all your furniture and do your kitchen and all that kind of stuff. So, and that's not unlike every facility that you have at the city. I don't remember how many hundreds, it might even been 1,000 pages of what the Appendix A for your parks and buildings were. And again, you're not going to prioritize those minuscule deviations from the standards or things that don't have a great impact on accessibility, unless you're going to go in and do a bathroom. If you're going to do a bathroom, you're going to go in and gut a bathroom. You're going to fix everything. That's the time to do it. And by code, you're required to do it. If you go in and to alter that space, everything within that space needs to be altered. So I don't have a lot of ability to walk you through the next 30 years of assistance with your implementation, but I know Michelle will be sending me emails, asking me questions as you're going through your process. And if something happens that you would like further assistance as we go on from here, I'm sure we can work something out, and would love to do that, because the hardest thing about my projects is I do all this stuff and spend all this time with all of you and get to know everybody and see everybody. And then I turn to my report and they say, bye, thank you. So that can be quite hard, but there's obviously more clients. So, and the sun is just falling below. Give me 1 second. I got to drop my shades on my window in my hotel. Sorry about that. Oh, that was nice that I was looking into the window and I had the non-opaque shade down, but the other one, oh my goodness. So anyways, so that's where we are with the prioritization and the timeline. That's, I think, where everyone struggles. And my best advice that I can give to you as you move into implementation, Michelle and others, is to try not to be overwhelmed. Realize that you probably need to pick some select facilities and areas of those facilities to prioritize. Talk to your political leaders and the mayor and try to figure out what budget amount you can get allocated annually. Whether it's 100,000, 500,000, whatever, to make specific ADA improvements, and determine where that goes every year to make those improvements, realizing that you're going to have other projects come up that you're going to be able to take care of some of these ADA compliance issues at the same time, with road projects and building renovations and other stuff that is part of it. And I would also urge you to try to, especially for your parks, there are grants out there to make park improvements. For your sidewalks, there's safe routes to schools and some of those other grant projects, and I'm sure ODOT has some other things that I'm not fully aware of. I know Michigan does. So there are some grant programs out there that accessibility improvements either qualify directly, or as part of the improvement you're able to improve both the condition of a facility like a sidewalk as well as make them ADA compliant. So Any questions about that prioritization timeline? I wasn't going to stop, but since that's really the crux of what you're going to be doing from here on out, at least in general, any questions or comments about that
I have a
process?
question. So on our proposed, I know we're gonna talk about this later, but on our proposed timeline, there's really not anything in here about us doing the prioritization, and I know that I spoke with Sarah kind of on a discussion about like what would be the role of the ADA task force moving forward, or if we were to have an ADA committee moving forward. Is there anything in the transition plan about moving forward and what the recommendations are for a group, a citizen group or a city group to remain in force to keep the process going?
Yes, there is. Every document that I've ever done, I've urged all clients to assemble a group of individuals comprised of both city staff as well as citizens that have expertise or have a disability that can provide input on their personal experiences and help to prioritize and select what projects get funded every year, especially when you know what your limitations are. The makeup of that committee is something that's outside of what we would recommend because there's so many different options and everyone would do it differently. This task force could certainly be one, but given the way that that group would need to function, I would probably think you would be better served to do it as an informal group that would make a recommendation to city council or something, because that doesn't then limit you to having set meetings and all the other things. It's not a formal, policy or decision-making body like this task force is. Even if the task force stayed on, if it was not continued as a formal city board or commission, it could certainly have a lot of value in helping make some decisions and recommendations on an annual budget of what projects should be considered for funding by your elected leaders. Does that answer your question, Tracy?
It does, but it's my main concern is to make sure that as we depart that process is already in the works so that all of our hard work doesn't fall by the wayside and that accountability is still considered when it comes to moving forward.
I think that's noted and it's in the minutes, so it has to something has to go, right? All right, so the context and the deviation from the standards, as I mentioned, gives us that level of difficulty in the priority. There was a question about sidewalk maintenance responsibility and the fact that the city has an ordinance that places sidewalk maintenance responsibility on property owners. That's addressed and discussed in the document. I don't remember exactly where, but there's some question out there about the legality of that. I am not an attorney, Andy. I'm not pretending to be an attorney, but this does come up quite often at the ADA National Symposium as well as other places. And I think generally the Department of Justice's stance is that sidewalks are a program of a community, and to try to place that entirely on property owners is going to be difficult. But saying that, funding it could still be done through a special assessment district or other way that would still put the financial burden on the property owners fronting on that right of way. So there is some case law out there. I put those cases in the transition plan. I don't think any of them really come out and say consistently that you can't do that, but it would be very difficult to require 200 individual property owners on one side of a street between, Madison and Detroit to individually take care of that process. It's probably much better handled by the city. How it's funded is a whole nother story, but so I did want to at least throw that out there. One other person, I think it was Chris, mentioned, and if any of you looked in great detail at the on-street parking analysis, the city has more on-street parking spaces than pretty much anyone I've ever seen, because you have such a urbanized area and some major commercial areas instead of just a defined downtown, and you have a severe lack of on-street accessible parking spaces. And many of the ones that you do have are questionable in terms of how safe they might be and the travel distance from the space. So if you're interested in that, I would urge you to go back and look at that in detail if you didn't before. Hopefully, and this is kind of a general statement, and I know some people did comment on this, that the document is intended to provide you with information about what is required. It's going to also try to provide you with information about what you currently have based on our findings. And then it also tells you what we recommend you think about or consider to rectify those issues. And from the on-street parking standpoint, there were a number of spaces that we suggested be considered for relocation because they just don't make sense where they're at. And you need to add quite a few more as you're going through and looking for that process. Fortunately, you don't lose any spaces when you add accessible spaces, because unless it's a perpendicular angled space, you don't need an access aisle. But you do need to place those parallel parking spaces at the end of the block at a corner curb ramp to get access to the sidewalk. And with the number that you need, I think you could very easily do that. So I know that that's one that's a fairly easy thing to change. Go in and add a sign and change your parking meter over, although you don't really necessarily need to do that. Some of the on-street parking spaces that you do have, the only indication that it's an on-street, that it's an accessible space, is just a blue meter, which is not a compliant signage indicator for an accessible space. I'm sure we may even have missed some on-street accessible spaces if there wasn't a sign, because it's so hard. I caught one that I just happened to be driving by, I think the last time I was there doing some of the training, that I had never seen before, because it just had a blue sticker on it. So we've identified as many as we found. I'm pretty confident that we have a fairly good representation of what you have, and that's a fairly easy fix by simply installing a compliant sign at the spaces at the end of some of those blocks, especially where you have some of the types of facilities that you may have disabled drivers frequenting, the Social Security Administration, your pharmacies, your doctor's offices, your shopping areas, and whatnot. I know Michelle brought up a couple of questions regarding detectable warnings on the curb ramps. And yes, Michelle, that is something that mobility device users do not like. But detectable warnings are really essential for those with vision loss or low vision to be able to know that they are leaving a sidewalk and entering a vehicle roadway. For that reason, we always recommend that if you don't need to put in detectable warnings, don't do it, because they don't serve a purpose in parking lots, shopping centers, and those kind of places. They're not prohibited, and many people don't know how to use them, and they just put them everywhere, including a lot of designers, engineers, and architects put them all over the place. They put them at Speedway coming out the door. They put them at Wendy's and McDonald's, all over the place for off right-of-way parking. You may have a disabled passenger or a disabled driver, but it's not going to be a blind driver. So the detectable warning plates are for vision impaired or blind individuals and are a requirement within the right-of-way only. And that's definitely one of the compromises in the ADA standards, which if you don't know and haven't heard, because I probably haven't told you all, the final rules for the right-of-way are out for final adoption, and they may very well be adopted by October or November of this year. So we will actually have a right-of-way standard that's enforceable, and it'll look very similar, I think, to what we have been using since 2011 when they were drafted. It's only been 12 years. So and then Michelle also mentioned something about several locations where curb ramps have a lip where the curb meets the street, and that's a very common thing. That's one of the items that we review as part of our curb ramp reviews, and those should all be noted. The curb ramp reviews are very detailed and do include vertical and horizontal separations at the interface between the curb and the road. And I know that is definitely a problem, not only going up where you have to traverse up the high side, but also going down, because you are going down already sometimes at speed and at a high slope. And then all of a sudden you drop off a half inch or 3/4 of an inch, and you can very easily be thrown forward into the street, which would not be a good thing for anyone. So the next two topics are more policy related. One was service animals, and I think two people actually mentioned the fact that miniature horses can also be service animals, and that is absolutely correct. In the definition of service animal in the, I think, chapter 8 of the transition plan, I used and have always used the definition that is on the ADA website, and it does not mention at all service animals or miniature horses. It specifically mentions dogs because dogs are 99.9% of the service animals out there. In the document itself, when it comes to policies related to service animals and the city code updates, because the city actually does have some provisions for service animals, I refer you to the guidance that the U.S. Department of Justice has on the ada.gov website, specifically related to service animals. It's very, very good page. I was looking at it again the other day for something. It gives some really good, it has a bunch of frequently asked questions. And as you go through looking at some of the recommendations for potential things to update in your code, referenced in section 2.9 of the transition plan related to service animals. There's some good guidance information there that you might want to consider. Whether you add miniature horses or not is certainly up to you. I think it's widely recognized that it is a service animal is a dog, but miniature horses are also able to be utilized. Just so few people do it. And the ones that do typically have pretty severe dog allergies. So that's why they exempted and allowed for miniature horses. But anything else is going to just be the emotional support animal, which do not get the same protection as service animals other than in your housing, federal housing, FHA. So if you have federal subsidized housing, emotional support animals do get similar protections to service animals in those situations. And then the last policy area and training area that I wanted to specifically talk about, because I actually made some updates right before I delivered that section, is related to the police department. Throughout the country, we've been seeing more and more interactions, oftentimes with results that are not very good for the individuals, police interacting with disabled drivers or disabled pedestrians, and not recognizing the fact that they do have a disability and that they need special treatment and special conditioning. At the ADA conference, there was actually a pretty big presentation on this. And because of that, I added a number of other things. Questions came up about when someone asked a question about whether or not a police department should have a policy on service animals and what they do, and when would they remove a person with a service animal from separate the two. And that really riled up the room pretty highly, if you can imagine. There are a number of people in there with service animals, and against their dead body, were they going to be separated from their service animal? But most of the law enforcement personnel, including some jail personnel, said it's their policy. They just separate. So it's not something that's formalized. They just don't they just basically take everything. And same, with mobility devices. If you had a disabled driver that was pulled over and had a suspended license or whatever, and you had to take them in for booking, what is the city's policy on that? How would you transport them if they were in a wheelchair? How would you transport them and their service animal together if they had a service animal and a wheelchair? How would you house them in a holding cell at police headquarters with their service animal and mobility device? So those are all things I think that the police department needs to look at, and I would urge Andy from the legal side to help guide them with that, as well as your other hired attorneys, to ensure that you have policies so that it's consistent across the board, and any officer that may interact with a disabled driver or a disabled pedestrian with a mobility device or a service animal knows what the city's policy is. We do this every time. Everyone does it consistently, and it's what everyone is commonly accepted. And I think the general consensus from the service animal owners in the room was, unless the service animal was being overly protective or in other ways that they could not keep them together, they should not be separated. When it comes to mobility devices, whether it be a wheelchair, a cane, a walker, unless that device was being used as a weapon, they should not be separated from their mobility device. I also suggested, I think, in the transition plan, that the city come up with a policy, and I'm going to do this with future clients as well, that disabled individuals that are taking into custody for processing have an expedited processing program and policy, to not have them sit in a holding cell for how many ever hours they typically do. Process them, expedite it, get them out, and get them back into their vehicle with their equipment and service animal as quickly as you possible, especially if it's a non-violent offense kind of thing. So it's a lot more difficulty and difficult to talk about something as important as that policy. I would let you all know that many states, including the state of Ohio, does have required initial training for police officers when they enlist and go through the academy, as well as continuing education requirements for interactions with disabled drivers and pedestrians, especially those that have hearing impairments and other issues that they need to recognize, because recognizing that someone has a disability that they need to accommodate as part of their normal daily routine is the most important thing. And then knowing how to accommodate those individuals is also very, very important.
Hey, Steve, I just wanted to let you know that we're almost out of time, and we had one other, we had to review our priority list, but did you have a lot more to present to us?
No, that was the last thing I wanted to talk about on a bigger scale, grander theme. So, no, that was the last thing.
Okay, and I did want to just really quickly say about that last item that I am familiar with a policy that was created at the Lakewood Police Department after a mother brought up concerns and her son was incorrectly deemed as with schizophrenia when he actually was autistic and was treated at the hospital for schizophrenia after being uh, categorized. And so they really made an effort to really change that policy, which I was so grateful for with Lakewood. And hopefully that'll just be expanded on so that some of these kids can be protected when it comes to a meltdown or something like that that might happen in public. So thank you so much for your attention to that part of this. And I'm so grateful for that presentation that you saw at the ADA conference that brought that up to your attention. So we appreciate you. I don't know if this is the last time we'll see you, or are we going to see you again after this?
Well, I don't think that I am on for any additional ADA task force meetings. I will be in town to make a presentation to city council. I have to talk with Michelle about the specific date. We had a date in mind, and I think it moved, and I'm 90% sure that that date it got moved to is not going to work for me. So I will be in town at least one other time, and like I said, I'm going to be hopefully working in that area more and more. I've got a big project now with the city of Columbus Parks. I'm reviewing all their community centers, rec centers, pools, and restroom buildings as part of a project team for that. And I know that there are some areas around Lakewood that are also looking at doing something from an ADA standpoint, from Toledo to Cleveland and all others. So I'm not going to go anywhere, and you all know where I am. And if this is the last time that we do meet over Zoom or whatever, you all have my email address, you have my phone. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me if you have a question. I welcome that and would love to have that interaction with any and all of you for whatever long, as long as I'm still working.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. We appreciate you and all your hard work.
You guys have been a great group to work with. I've really enjoyed my work in the city of Lakewood, and I know DLZ is continuing to work for the city in a number of ways, including making improvements to some of your facilities for ADA. So I'll be involved, at least from the non-visible side.
Oh, and if you could let us know, Michelle, when that presentation to city council happens, I really think it's important that at least, if not the whole task force be present, at least myself or other members that would be interested to also speak and just be there for that. I think that's super important. So keep us in the loop about that. Okay, so I guess we're going over this final list of timeline, right, Michelle?
Yes, we have a proposed timeline in the agenda. So we've been doing really great as far as reviewing and getting comments back to Steve. So thank you to everyone who's done that. What we want to do is go to the next phase. So you can see that all internal city and task force member comments were due back. Let me put my glasses on August 23rd. Today is the task force meeting, August 29th. This might be a little bit aggressive to say we would have the rough draft out for public comment on September 1st, because we're not quite ready to do that, I don't think. So like I said, this is a rough draft. We do have to get those copies printed, put them out, and publicize it. So we're probably a couple, another week or two from getting that out for public comment. And once we do get that out, we'll plan on having that out for 2 weeks. And we'll plan on doing social media posts and trying to advertise that. I do have a mailing to go out to all of the groups that we sent out initially, and we'll encourage them to review that document. And then we're going to, we want to move that September meeting to the October date. So that date might get moved as well if we have to move the public comment period. So you'll be getting a poll on that. And the city council review, you know, Steve is very busy right now, but we do want to make sure he and task force members are available for that. First, we lock in Steve, and then we'll, you know, so we'll play with those dates to make sure we have a good showing. But city council will have a number of meetings too. So if everybody can't make one of the meetings, you'll probably be able to make a committee meeting or a second meeting. It'll be nice to have representation there for those. We are hoping to get this wrapped up before the holidays start, just because it's so much more difficult for everyone once we get into the holiday season. And we'd prefer not to have this go through to January, because this is budget season too. So it's actually a really good time for us to be in front of city council. And you know, we've already been sharing these documents with Public Works. They've already utilized some of them. You've probably noticed curb ramps around town are getting renovated. Almost 300 are using Steve's data, and they're being made ADA compliant. So we're already seeing impacts from the work that's been done, and we want to make sure that during budget season, we're right up there at City Council, getting allocations and getting this approved. So yeah, this is a rough agenda that needs a little updating. And if anyone had any comments on this rough timeline, be interested to hear them now.
So Michelle, I see that there's an extra window of time for that 2 weeks. So if the draft is out for public comment, what is like the last day that it could be out for it to be 2 weeks and still remain on the schedule then, is my question. I'm trying to do the math here. It looks like you left an extra 9 days or 10 days.
Yes, so we could, so say we can get this out on the 8th of September. Then we would push the public comment period out another week. So that would be, that's September 22nd to, so we could likely still meet those dates. I know city council review, we're probably gonna push that out as opposed to bringing it in. I just have to get with Steve on those dates. So when he'll be available to travel and be in person. So yeah, it's gonna take a little looking at.
Okay, so the task force meeting will be dependent on the close of public comment. And let's see, so okay, I see. So the final draft will be delivered to the city and task force for final review after public comment. If we aren't given that in time, we'll be able to move that meeting out further, that 10-10 estimated meeting. Okay.
Yeah. And I know that I know Steve has said in the past, a lot of times there aren't many comments from public review, but we do want to make sure if we do get some comments, somebody catches something and there's some change we want to make, that you guys get to see it and we get to discuss it before it goes forward. So yeah, that's the idea, is to make sure that we have time for the public comment and then you have time to review it before we take, and so that you're prepared to vote on it, to take it to city council.
So I will do what I can, Michelle, to make sure you get that document. As I mentioned at the beginning, I would like everyone to see a track changes version that hopefully addresses all of your things that can be changed, and you can see what I did to address some of your comments, and just turn those around very quickly. I guess once we get close to that 8th date, we're certainly going to need to make sure that. So I'm actually going to be back in the office on Thursday, Michelle. I'm traveling
Okay.
home tomorrow night, so I'll be back home in my office Thursday, and I will process and get you a version of the document with track changes sent out for everyone to take a look at. And then I would urge everyone to look specifically at the comments that you had previously, make sure I address them adequately. And then if you want to look at all the other track changes stuff, I think you'll see some other things that you hopefully agree made the document better. Because I think they did. I think your comments really helped make the document better. I've never received this amount of input and review from a client on the document. So thank you.
I have a question if nobody else has any more comments or questions. No?
Well,
Okay.
I just wanted to say that I still am not really clear what you asked Tracy before, like, there's nothing on the agenda or our list of timelines of like, when will there be a committee formed to start working on what is next with this?
So that's not something that falls under my purview of forming any committees. The task force was formed by the mayor. And I know Tracy's had some conversations with Sarah on city council. It's not anything I have any control over. And yeah, and to my knowledge, the task force doesn't have the power to extend itself. So I think Sarah's the one who was working on that because only the mayor, to my knowledge, and possibly city council can form an ongoing committee or another task force.
Yeah, I just didn't want all this work to be for naught.
Right.
You know,
Just to let you know, Chris, is that I personally have no intention of dropping the ball on that portion of it. As you probably could have guessed. And I'd like to bring that up at the council attendance when Steve visits the council and we say we're ready to form an ongoing committee for accessibility and have this let them know we expect the support of council on that, since we do have Sarah's support, but I expect that they would support us volunteering to help, because we've been doing, well, whoever they bring on, it might not necessarily be the same group, but they probably would start appointing from scratch. And of course, people that had this group would probably have more of an opportunity priority wise. But yeah, so I will definitely be pursuing that. And I'm also still on Lakewood Community Relations Advisory Commission, so that's another route to discussing making that happen as well.
yeah, I mean, I believe that
my comment.
Sorry, it would have to be people from the city, like the department heads and things involved with this too, because you're talking about budgeting and money and all that. But yeah, okay. Sorry, I just didn't really understand that there was a clear answer from the last time. So.
Right. Yeah, the resolution that formed the task force disbands upon recommendation to council. But I know that Tracy and I know that Ami have also been talking with Sarah about trying to get some sort of a committee that would be in an advisory capacity. I just don't know that they've landed on how that's going to operate, but I know that Tracy will continue to work on that with Sarah, and anyone else who wants to reach out to Sarah and discuss that. I think she'd be really open to hearing any suggestions you might have and hearing your support for that. So.
Thanks, Chris. And then I know we're out of time, but I just wanted to say I didn't submit this as comment because I'm guessing it's not really ADA policy thing, but I know it's been brought up a bunch of times about saying that the services provided to seniors in the city of Lakewood should be made equal with the services that are needed for adults with disabilities that are not seniors, who sometimes need those services as much as, if not more. I continually drive past Cove and I see all these vans just parked there, sitting there, and knowing that there's a lot of people that can't get to the grocery store still in the city of Lakewood, especially without the circular. So I'm wondering was there anything in the plan about that? And what do you suggest we could do, Steve, to try to pursue that, if you have anything?
Well, the document specifically addresses disabilities. However, 70% or more of senior citizens typically have a disability. So there are certainly avenues to get some of the similar services. But no matter what you do, there's always going to be holes, unfortunately, in the system. You know, even some of the large transit providers have holes in their on-demand system and their fixed ride route system to address some of the special needs for getting both people with disabilities as well as seniors directly from their homes to doctors or from their homes to pharmacists or so there's always going to be holes, Tracy, unfortunately. You know, there are some services out there that can do it. You know, some of the Ubers and stuff that are able to actually transport people with mobility devices, but there's always unfortunately going to be holes. And if you can figure out a way to plug as many of them as you can with the money available, and there we go with the money thing again, because everything costs money, unfortunately. You know, more power to you. And you certainly can, as a city, make a policy decision that if there's enough interest out there in helping the seniors, and the vans are there and the staff is there to do it, they certainly could say we're going to do the same thing for this group as what we're doing for this group because the need is very similar. So it just, again, it's just got to be a policy thing that through working with your council members is the way to go, I guess.
Well, I'm just gonna say this real quick before we adjourn that I was just appointed to the Leadership Council on the Cuyahoga County Board of Developmental Disabilities. And I know that Lakewood does partner with the board on quite a few initiatives. And I'm hoping that, just saying this because this is being recorded in public, that there can be further partnership in the regards to some of these services and that they can provide equal services to non-senior adults with disabilities as they are currently providing wonderfully to the seniors. It's a wonderful thing. Meal deliveries, hot meals, transportation, community programs, all kinds of stuff that some of the adults with disabilities that aren't seniors could definitely benefit from. So, and on that note, we're out of time. Does anybody have any last comments or anything that needs to be said?
I just want to say thank you, Steve, for all your hard work.
Ben,
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been a great education, Steve.
Good.
Like a really comprehensive education, but it's been very cool to learn all this and see it in action. So thank you.
Great. Well, I accomplished my goal then.
Yes, thank you so
I
much,
agree.
Steve, for all your
Thank
hard work. I know everyone appreciates it.
You're on that note, we will wait to hear from everybody on the publishing of the final draft, and we'll be receiving that also, or okay, so and then we'll wait to just kind of make the plan for the next meeting as we find out the schedule as it goes. So anybody wanted to motion to adjourn?
Motion to
Motion to
adjourn.
adjourn. Michelle, you beat me. I'll second.
Again.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone.
All right,
Thank
see
you.
you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Tracy,
all.
I wanted to tell you, if people are looking to get